What's up, guys? We are here at Cooler Master's Vertical Case Factory. Now what that means is this entire plant is dedicated to the production, packaging, and shipping of cases just like this. Now what we're going to get a chance to see today is the SL600M go from panels to coating to assembly, packaging, and then all the way down the assembly line. So let's hop in there and take a look.
We're here on the street asking people, would you prefer the car on the right or the car on the left, which comes with the Meshify S2?
Dude, what's even going on here? The Lamborghini.
There you go. People prefer the Meshify S2.
While Brian's performance may be a bucket of fail, the new Meshify S2 is performance-driven. Visit our website to learn more.
About a week ago, I came back from a trip to the cities of Shenzhen and Dongguan in southern China, where Cooler Master had arranged a week's worth of tours to their various manufacturing facilities. The plan was to hit everything from screws to cables to peripherals to full case assembly. And to say the information we received was comprehensive would be an understatement. I was on a tour with Steve from Gamers Nexus, and he and I decided that it would be best if we coordinated our coverage to not only best suit our respective audiences, but also to complement each other rather than overlap. As such, there are a few parts of this video where you'll hear me defer to Steve's excellent deep dive approach to coverage for more in-depth looks at things like how cables or tempered glass panels are manufactured. Hop on over to his channel and give him a follow if you guys don't already. The link is in the description. This video in particular is going to focus on how a PC case is made. And because Cooler Master let us see everything from creating the tooling through packaging for shipment, you guys get to come along for the ride, and I'll do my best to give you some information on what exactly the things are that you're looking at. Now, the first step in the process is creating what's called tooling. You may have heard this term before, and you also may have heard that it's expensive. In fact, tooling for any one specific case can run anywhere in the range from $250,000 to $1 million US, depending on complexity and if they can reuse previous tooling from other cases. In fact, Cooler Master often takes into consideration how much tooling they can reuse for a new design when deciding if putting a case into production is financially feasible. When we say tooling, what we're referring to is the fairly simple metal slabs that are used in the stamping process, which we'll get into in a second. Because each case panel needs multiple pieces of tooling, and the creation of even one piece can take months, this is clearly not a fast or easy process. Tooling starts out as generic steel slabs. The slabs themselves cost hundreds or thousands of dollars. The slabs are then CNC machined, drilled, and shaped to form the exact molds needed for stamping. They are then ground down to perfect flatness, and then additional cutting is done via copper wiring. This is an arduous task that leads to the precise shaping and contouring requested, and this process of wire cutting alone can take up to 3 months. There are about 80 pieces of tooling needed for any one standard case, and more for the larger and more complicated ones. Tools are generally usable for about 5 years, and Cooler Master keeps their tooling going back 15 years or so. Once the tooling for a case is completed, it can be swapped onto the assembly line in about 2 hours. But keep in mind that an assembly line is only set up to create one panel, one drive cage, one piece of a case. When you consider that each case can have upwards of 20 to 30 pieces or more, the entire manufacturing process timeline starts to come into focus. The manufacturing lines are becoming increasingly automated in not only these factories but also many others in China. Many of the stamping machines, robotic arms, and hydraulic presses in this footage costs hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, and the cost of switching lines over to full automation is real. In fact, it takes about 2 years for a factory to recoup the cost of swapping out just one line to full automation from manned machines. As you can see, each line has a specific job and a specific part that it's manufacturing. This is called stamping, and you could clearly see why. The machines literally act as a stamp, pressing down on each metal piece, conforming it to the shape of the piece of tooling below. In between each step, a robotic arm, a bar with a suction cup attached, or sometimes even a human will move the pieces from platform to platform, with each subsequent stamp bringing the raw steel panel closer to the shape that you might identify as a case side panel. In total, the metal stamping manufacturing lines produce roughly 200 to 400 pieces per hour of whatever it is they've been asked to make. The end result of this entire process is many pieces of raw steel that look vaguely familiar as something that might come included with the latest master case, but are in no way ready for shipping. While stamping is still the preferred method of making these types of metal fabrications for PC cases and also many other things, when it comes to raw speed, nothing compares to laser cutting. This is a much newer technology and overall is far more expensive than stamping, as rate of production is much lower. Typically, companies will use laser cutting to produce mock-ups or as proof of concept pieces, typically low production run units. If you see a prototype case at Computex that won't go into production until next year, it's likely that this is how that case was made, because 3D modeling software can be used to make whatever you'd like without having to go through months-long tooling process. Once the case panels are manufactured, they head upstairs. Cooler Master's vertical case factory is quite literally vertical, with 5 levels of different production lines and sadly no elevator to connect them, so we definitely got our steps in during this trip. The second level of the factory is where the raw steel panels are unloaded from large crates and suspended from hangers like you might see at a dry cleaner's. This is to help with sorting, as some panels stay raw but need some basic cleaning and finishing, while some get painted, coated, screen printed on, etc. The case panels travel up a level, where they pass through an alkaline bath, cleaning off surface particles which unfortunately was out of the range of our cameras. The panels are then separated. Some head back down for packaging and storage, and some get moved to a second hanger rotation assembly. As you can see, the hangers here are much more organized and create almost a wall of case panels, and that's because they have to be individually fired with a handheld torch that looked similar to a roofing torch but was burning blue hot. This removes any burrs or flashing that were hangers on from the stamping process and preps the surface to receive coating. Next up is 2 stages of powder coating. The first is done entirely by hand, and depending on the size of the pieces being coated, between 200 and 1,000 pieces can be hand sprayed in an hour. After this initial layer, the panels pass through an enclosed machine that resprays each panel completely. Just like when properly cooking a steak, you need to seal in those juices by finishing it in an oven, so the panels are baked for 30 minutes at 200 degrees Celsius. Each finished panel is then back on the conveyor system and heads back downstairs. Anytime you see someone in this video with a yellow collar, that indicates that they are a quality inspector looking over the previous stage of work to verify that it was done satisfactorily. The panels are moved from their hangers and placed on a large belt, where they slowly move down the line and are picked up by workers who look them over more thoroughly and then package them in fabric-bound elastic to prevent marring or scratching. Each like case panel is then packed and stored in a giant rolling bin that will be moved to the assembly line when needed. And like magic, we've teleported upstairs to the actual case assembly area. Today, Cooler Master was producing their new SL600M, the aluminum case with vertical airflow that I did a build with back when it came out in October. The first step is to bolt in those 200mm fans that enable the vertical airflow pathway. The fans themselves are manufactured off-site, and for more on case fans and testing, you can check out Steve's channel. Next up is to start riveting and screwing everything together. This does take quite a bit of time and encompasses 2 entire U-shaped assembly lines. Once the fans are screwed on, the next 2 pieces to get attached are the front and rear chassis frame. This is what you typically screw fans to, and later you'll see expansion slots here also. Next up is the motherboard tray. The tray gets delivered to the line with rubber grommets pre-installed, but without any attachments. Here you can see her bolting in those pesky standoffs that we used to have to install ourselves, but case manufacturers are largely doing that for us now. Cooler Master did run us through their screw factory to show us how these standoffs and every other screw they use is actually manufactured, at a rate of 2.1 million screws per day. And Steve will have a detailed look at this process on Gamers Nexus, including an in-depth look at the most fun part of our trip, screw class. Back to the case assembly, where the motherboard tray is still receiving Super Soldier Serum enhancements in the way of cable routing channels and Velcro ties. Once it's all upgraded, it gets riveted into the front and rear by a separate worker. Moving along the line, we see the rear expansion slot covers are next up, and they come pre-prepared with all of the covers in place. Because this is a rotatable assembly, something that's a little different from most cases that you see, this piece cannot be riveted in like the others, and requires individual hand-placed screws torqued down to spec. The case is starting to come together now, and I can already picture it in my head, a fully built gaming system with dancing RGB lighting that triggers all the people who hate that rainbow effect. The top cross brace is placed on and aligned by one station and then riveted in place by several others. The reason it's done this way is to avoid job fatigue. The workers often swap places on the line from day to day, as riveting one thing in one place for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, all year could literally drive someone insane. Plus, it actually leads to decreased efficiency and quality. With workers being responsible for one single part of the process that changes regularly, fatigue is reduced and quality increases. As we saw earlier, QC checks happen as the product moves down the line, and yellow-collared employees do spot checks to ensure proper construction. If something is found that's wrong, the case is pulled from the line and delivered to this dude, who does manual repairs as needed. This line moves about 150 cases per hour, and each case takes about 85 rivets. The SL600M is then bagged up and moved across the room to the second assembly line, where the familiar bits start getting attached. This starts with the aluminum feet. All of the aluminum pieces on this case are actually provided by an outside vendor partner of Cooler Masters and are not produced in-house. Rubber pads are adhered to the bottom, and then in goes the power cable extension. This is needed on this case because of the non-traditional power supply location at the front of the case instead of at the base in the rear. Next up is, you guessed it, more screwing. The 2.5-inch drive sleds are slotted in and attached with a thumb screw, and then the fan and RGB controller module is screwed in as well. Nothing is plugged up at this time. That part of the process comes later, right before packaging. As mentioned, the power supply here is located at the top and in the front, and to hold it in place, we need a bracket and a shroud, and that's exactly what gets installed next. Because it's all modular and user serviceable, screws are used instead of rivets. The front I/O wiring is dropped in next, already attached to the USB ports and audio jacks. You'll notice that he's just putting it in place here, routing it through the correct hole. Later on, it will be tested before any final connections are made. We were able to tour the facility that Cooler Master uses to produce all of their cables in-house at a rate of 80,000 total cables per day, and it was quite impressive. There are QC checks at each step in the process with less than a 1% defect rate. They manufacture front panel wiring, USB, audio, and any other wiring that they might need for a case. Steve will have a deep dive into cables on his channel, so make sure you get subscribed if you're more interested in the process of making USB cables, front panel cables, and any other cables. We were able to see why it's so difficult to manufacture USB 3.1 Type-C connectors. Each wire within the cable has to be actually hand twisted and placed in the right order, and only one technician at a time does this. The result is a cost that's about 10 times higher for this type of cable versus a traditional USB Type-A. Anyway, let's get back to the assembly line, where our next worker is attaching the front panel bank of connectors to the case frame. After that's done, it's time to connect our fans to the controller, and luckily for this case, there's only two. Still, this clearly takes time, as you want to ensure that it won't come loose in shipping. Next, they put in place the vertical bracket that's unique to this case design. It's put in place and then screwed in at the appropriate points at the top and at the bottom. And, oh man, look at this! These are recognizable now. The front aluminum panels are snapped on by the next station, and the SL600M starts to blossom like a flower, or a butterfly or something, whatever blossoms. QC check is up next, and they hook up the almost finished products to a power supply to test the function of the controller, the fans, and the LED front panel that does that cool thing where it lights up when you wave at it. It's time for some cable management. Finally, I was getting a little anxious here with all those cables just flopping all over the place willy-nilly. The front panel wiring is bunched and secured under a Velcro strap with a desiccant packet attached. After that, it's time for some finishing touches. The top-mounted fan bracket is placed on and then screwed in place. After all, it's much easier to install fans when you can remove this, rather than it being riveted on. Another quality check by a yellow collar is on deck, with a manual repair station, again, ready to tackle any problems that are found. After that, it's a simple matter of snapping on the top aluminum piece at the next station, and passing the cases down the line to receive the steel right side panel, as well as the now ubiquitous tempered glass left side panel. Tempered glass manufacturing is an unexpectedly fascinating process that Cooler Master let us take a closer look at while on the trip. They showed us how a piece of regular glass goes from a giant pane, gets cut down to size by scoring and then manual breaking, which I got a chance to do. The panes are then sent through a machine that smooths the edges and drills out any necessary holes. And then it's on to the tempering furnace. 700 degrees Celsius for 1 to 2 minutes, followed by 30 seconds of quick cool down, creates the tempering effect, and I got a chance to test a piece the way their QC team does it by literally shattering it on the floor. Neat. And then there was this guy, who was definitely having way too much fun. But we're in the home stretch now, and momentum is strong. You can't stop us, you can only hope to contain us. Packaging takes place at the end of the second assembly line. Each case gets bagged up, styrofoam pieces are attached to the top and the bottom, and then the case is hand carried over to the packing station. The cardboard box is slid down around it, the whole thing is flipped over, accessories are tossed in, and then the box gets put through a taping machine. And there it is, ladies and gentlemen. Well, mostly gentlemen if we're being honest. Your finished product, an SL600M, ready for shipment. Maybe this is the one that you get when you order it from Newegg. I hope you guys enjoyed this look at PC case production and how much goes into making what amounts to a small steel box that sits on your desk. Thanks to Cooler Master for letting us film in their factory, and make sure to check out Gamers Nexus for more related, in-depth information. As always guys, get subscribed to the channel if you are not already. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.